This is Regenerative Skills, the podcast helping you to learn the skills and solutions to create an abundant and connected future. I'm your host, Oliver Gaucher. New Society Publishers has been a leader in sustainable publishing for over 40 years now. They're an activist, solutions-oriented publisher focused on bringing you tools for a world of change. They've now published over 600 books available both in print and ebooks, as well as an increasing library of audiobook selection as well. They care deeply about both what they publish and how they do business, and so the same thinker and doer approach permeates their in-house work and the books themselves. A certified B Corporation, they print on 100% post-consumer recycled paper, and they are carbon neutral, and they print only in North America, never offshore. And that's just the company themselves. Most importantly, they've got the best selection of books that you need to build your own regenerative, ecological, or community-based projects. You can check out their full list of titles now at newsociety.com. Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. So, though we've covered many aspects of soil health on this show in previous episodes, this is an area of scientific and agronomic study which is constantly growing and evolving. It seems to me that there's a growing number of specialists who are pioneering research in very specific and detailed aspects of soil health, which helps to expand our overall picture of the ecosystem under our feet. But at the same time, it's essential to be able to translate all of this advanced biology, chemistry, and even physics into information that someone from outside of academia can translate into action on the land and a soil care and fertility strategy. So thanks to another great recommendation and connection from my friend Anja at Soilify, I was put in contact with Matt Slaughter to explore this kind of practical information. Now for 20 years, Matt has been helping farmers around the world understand their soil microbiology and finding ways to help them bring soil back to life. He is the founder, president, and laboratory director of Earthfort, where he's primarily focused on customer support through consultation and education, but is also responsible for product research and development. As the creator of Earthfort's products, he is constantly striving to help customers understand and use the products to the greatest advantage of the end user. And as a scientist, philosopher, and a poet, Matthew is always learning and attempting to integrate natural, holistic processes into agriculture. Matt was also an early student of Elaine Ingham and worked with her for years, going out onto consultations in remote places around the world. And in this interview, Matt starts by sharing some incredible stories from those early days in the field and the key learnings that have stayed with him until today. We talk about how he's developed the soil amendments and products that his company is well known for, and what he's learned about how they work over years of study. We also get into broader understanding of soil health and function, as well as how it can differ across contexts and use cases. Matt gives his thoughts on many other soil amendment strategies like bioinoculants, different types of compost, biochar, and the like, as well as what all of this research and working with farmers all around the world has taught him about the commonalities and patterns of productive soil and land. Now, I've often been careful not to go too deep and academic into the topic of soil health because, well, there's other shows that do that, are dedicated to that kind of information, and because of how technical and unapproachable it can be. But Matt does a great job of making all of the immense knowledge and experience that he has simple and approachable. So I know that you'll find valuable insights that you can use to develop your own soil care strategy. And with all of that said, let's hear now from Matt Slaughter. Matthew, thank you so much for taking time today. It's great to connect with you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much. And I really appreciate you doing this.
Fantastic. I'm really glad to hear that. And we have a lot that I would love to cover today. I mean, the topic of soil health, the transition to regenerative agriculture, and all of the subtopics that we can explore into that are vast. But let's start with the beginning. Can you give me a bit of an insight into your journey into studying soil and working with farmers?
Yeah. So it's actually a long story. As I was unwrapping it for my project in Kenya, because I was working with a lot of high level people. They were very interested in that journey as well. So my wife and I have been married for almost 30 years now. We'll be married in 30 years in March. And when we first got married, we signed up for the Peace Corps. through the United States Peace Corps program, specifically to go to Africa or some other wonderful place in the world to work on agriculture. And she had an ag degree, and I was a computer science guy. So we signed up for that. Gosh, it's been almost 30 years ago. And it didn't work out. So, life happens, things move along, and, that dream kind of got waylaid by, advanced degrees and other types of things. So in 2003, I was looking for work, and I was a computer guy, and I signed up. I got hired to work at a laboratory here in Corvallis. That was 2003. It was the Soil Food Web Laboratory, the original laboratory of Dr. Elaine Ingham. And I know people in the regenerative world will know that name, and
Certainly,
certainly not a bad credential to have an association with. She, I was hired to work on their lab management system. So, and it it turns out that the computer side of things was easy to fix once somebody got in there knowing what was going on. And in less than 6 months, we created a system that was highly functional, and she was very pleased. So she offered me the opportunity to learn. And I decided at that time that the soil and agriculture, working with farmers and things like that, was much more interesting than computer science. So, and that's, I hear this story a lot from a lot of the farmers that I work with, is they were in tech and they made some money and they went into farming. It's like, so it's not an uncommon story for some of us to want to get away. So, and the way it worked out, I don't have a degree in soil science. I don't have a degree in microbiology. I don't have a degree in agronomy. I learned by doing. So the way she taught me is great. First, she gave me a pile of books to read. And of course, she had her own teachings, and she taught me what she does and what she knows. And I learned all about the lab and all of the testing methodology and everything that goes with that. But then basically, she just started sending me out into the field. So the way she put it is like, well, I'm getting old. She wasn't that old, but she's like, I don't really feel like going to rural Nicaragua to work with sugarcane. I'm like, okay, I'll go. And she's like, oh, there's this coffee plantation in Guatemala. It's like, it's way up in the mountains, and I don't want to go. Basically, she sent me to all the little places that she didn't really necessarily want to go to. Little roughing it. She wanted to do speaking and training and stuff, and not so much of the on the ground consulting kind of stuff. So I just started doing all of these projects that basically put me in the field directly with the farmers and trying to figure out practical application of the concepts, utilizing soil microbiology, looking at the practices, the tools, and all those things, and just learn by doing. It was really, really a hands-on, a very practical. And I look at everything and I say, okay, this is a good idea. Can we make it easier? Can we make it more simple, more accessible to the farmers? We've done the composting, compost teas, compost extracts, looking at all the different types of soil amendments. And that's that experience led me to expand the reach and the scope of what we were doing. And so I formed Earth Fort as a company to address the practical side. What are the products? What are the tools that are available to farmers? How can we make sure that what they're getting is working and doing well? So, and then leveraging the lab as well to make sure everything that we said that we're doing is actually working. So using the lab and just going out and researching products and finding things. So, very practical, and does no-till really work? let's find out. Let's look at that and see what the answer to that is. Very, very complicated.
Mm.
To that kind of question. I'm sure that'll come up later. But so that was my journey, and I just I've been expanding the reach and trying to find ways. I've been trying to get to Africa for almost 30 years, and it was only just last year that I was finally able to go. So I've got a education project I'm working on in Uganda, and then in Kenya we're working on getting some of the products to the farmers. And then I've got we've got contacts in Rwanda and Zambia, Tanzania, looking at Ethiopia, South Sudan, so that kind of East Africa area. Plus, I'm trying to get things going in Europe, working with Soilify, and Anja does say hello, by the way.
That's good. I'll reach out there again after this and
Yeah,
thank her for the
yeah,
connection.
yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
So, anyway, you know, it goes on and on. There's all kinds of projects, all kinds of little things that I've done that really, outside of, but always correlated to soil health, and then looking at that as probably, at least for me, the most pressing issue that I see that I can make a difference. And I think that that's what's important to me, is that there is this opportunity to everybody has a role to play, I think, and so my role is soil and doing things and helping the farmers, but in a very practical way. Not interested in making huge sweeping changes to the bureaucratic approach, legislation and all those things, although I support people who do it. I'm really in it. The farmers in Africa are really, I'm really keen on, because it's like 2 acres of farm land is the average, and there's thousands of them, and a small change in one farm has a ripple effect.
Mm.
And because they're so community oriented, more often than not, we just go in and talk to the village elders, and that whole village will transform. So,
Mm-hmm.
anyways, yeah.
That's remarkable. That's such a cool story. And it's very different from how a lot of people, especially on the research and development side of agricultural products, have started out. Having not gotten your degree in that specific area and having trained mostly out in the field, I'm curious to go back a little bit. What were some of the most impactful experiences and jobs that you got to go out on in those early days that shaped the way that you approach, let's say, the research portion, the advice that you give, how you build a project and build solutions with people?
Yeah. Wow. There's some really cool ones. I think one of the biggest projects I worked on was also one of the most learning. So there was a project that we were involved with in Ukraine. It was 100,000 hectares.
Wow.
Of a farm that was under management from a European company. So this group out of the Netherlands. And what I learned there was scale. If we want to do, it's one thing to say you need a ton of compost per acre. It's another thing to say you need 100,000 tons of compost for this farm. It's one thing to talk about, oh, you need, 10, 20 gallons of a tea or an extract or something. Very simple, certainly, very doable at small scale. But when you start scaling up into this huge, I mean, it was so big you literally couldn't drive it in a day, right? Wow. You couldn't visit the farm, all the fields and everything. So now it turned into a logistics question. How do we scale this? And also, the other thing I learned too was to really rely on the farmer and the local knowledge about the farming practices, to listen, to listen, and then figure out what are the tools, what are the approaches, what are the kinds of things and what are their real goals? So I started developing this whole idea of, I started working on, holistic management and looking at, critical thinking as a tool for, well, what's really going on here, and how do we apply some of these principles, and what are the other things that we're missing? Can we find other pieces that not just our own knowledge base, but what are other people doing? So that I learned a lot about culture. It's really fun. That was Ukraine in 2007. So it wasn't very long after they were released from their Soviet relationship. And so the culturally, it was very fascinating to learn about that. And so I started becoming very sensitive to, when I go into a project, learning about, scale, people, because it's all about the farmer. It's not really about the soil. It's all about the
Right. You
farmer,
could fix
the
anything
food.
with the soil, but if the farmer is going to go right back to the same management, what did you
Yeah,
change?
or if they have other ideas and you're not listening,
Mm.
it derails it. Um, that's why it's just important to listen a lot. So really, truly becoming a consultant, in the sense of, I have a set of knowledge. I want to listen to what you're doing, and then figure out together how to apply what I know and integrate it with what you know. And so Ukraine was big. That was a big lesson. I learned a lot in, sugarcane in Nicaragua was fun. That was also a very large scale project. And it was, yeah, again, culturally, but also just scale. That was like one of the really big things that I started really looking at. It's like, even in Africa, even though I'm only working with farmers that maybe have an average of 2 acres or a hectare, um, there's literally millions of them.
Yeah.
So that's a
It is
different
still over
scale.
2/3 of the world's farming population is on 5 acres or less, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not that the individual farmer has a scale problem, but that's what I'm learning in Kenya, though, is that, yeah, there's, you know conventional agricultural practices. You're looking at 200-300 kilos per acre of inorganic fertilizer is the typical application rate. And so, you know, then you start looking at that scale. Even at that, it's like, well, how are they getting that? How is it
Yeah.
even possible if you've never been to Africa or some of these other parts of the world where, the infrastructure isn't there?
Yeah.
So that was part of the logistics too, is infrastructure. Ukraine has bad roads. Kenya has horrible roads. Uganda is impossible. Haiti is just crazy with, it, as the crow flies, it's 45 miles, but it takes 6 hours to get where you're trying to go, and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff,
I've lived in
you
those
know.
countries too. I know
Yeah.
exactly how that is. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, but yeah, Ukraine was a big one. But then I also did projects like, working on a project with Fukushima and radiation
Mm.
cleanup and things like that, and different kinds of remediation. And that's a whole different realm of, um, science, working with
So
scientists
crop
to
production's
do
not
that.
the goal there.
Crop production ultimately is the goal. Can we put this land
To
back
clean up
into a,
the contaminated soils. I got
yeah,
you.
because that was, and it wasn't just the radiation, it was also the flooding. Ocean water flooded a third of Japan's rice fields
Right. So
with
salting
ocean
strategy.
water.
Yeah.
Yeah. So can we clean that up? And that was that's a fun project. It's still ongoing. Sadly, the person I was working with there passed away, and
Mm.
so the project stopped. But it doesn't really matter anyways, because in Fukushima they don't have the reactors shut down yet. So cleanup is kind of a misnomer.
Sure.
because
Damage
it's like,
control,
yeah, it's
maybe.
not as bad. I mean, it's not as acutely bad as it was initially, but it's certainly they still have an ongoing problem. So any
Right.
cleanup you do today is probably it's not gonna last.
Man, that's tricky.
So yeah, so that's just an ongoing issue.
What
Um,
were some of the conclusions that you came from these projects of scale? Like you said, it's not feasible to do hundreds of thousands of tons of compost for that large of fields. What were some of the
yeah,
conclusions you came to?
yeah. So pick your battles is one. Um, on 100,000 hectares, the question isn't how do we treat the whole farm? How do we
Yeah.
treat everything? But to say what areas need the most help? Where can we focus our efforts? If we got, is there 1,000 hectare section that really needs a lot of help and maybe the rest of them are doing well? Also hybrid systems is really, that's a lot of my customers are doing hybrid systems where they're using, it's not organic and it's not fully regenerative, but it's a combination of things where you're utilizing biological principles and chemistry principles together, um, so that you can manage to grow a lot of it. Like in Illinois, we work with a lot of soy and corn, and most of those systems are hybrid, where they reduce the amount of fertilizers they're using and they
Sure.
reduce the amount of pesticides and herbicides. So we learned that you can't always treat everything. You can't always, and also really looking at the principles and trying to figure out, can we concentrate this stuff? Can we get biology into a system that isn't, so use so much water, or utilize, so can we concentrate things, and also finding the tools that will help the system work itself, so compost, if you can't do a ton of compost per acre, maybe you can turn that ton of compost into an extract and liquefy it and get the biology out. And then at that point, can I do 5 or 10 or less gallons per acre, and get biology into the system if you need it. And that's the other thing too, is that testing is really helpful to determine, do I even need to add biology? Or is the biology there and it just needs a help,
Mm.
or is there something going on in the soil that's limiting the function? So that's what we're doing in Africa. It's like they don't need biology specifically, they just need help getting it kickstarted, you
Mm.
know. And so, really, and then practices like change what you're doing and get out of the way. That's a big part of it. I think that's where regenerative agriculture really starts to come into its own, you know but then you've got time scale, right? Now you've got another logistics issue is, if I stop tilling, how long will it take for the system to start functioning the way I want it to?
Mm.
you know and if that's the only thing I do, or am I doing other things to support it?
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
so
Man,
but
okay, so
yeah.
there's so many things I want to start with here, but because soil science is, as far as I understand it, such an emerging and constantly growing field at the
Sure.
moment.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody who studies this at a professional level that I've talked to says that we're just on the cusp of understanding this ecosystem below our feet. What are
Mm-hmm.
some of the principles, patterns, or key bits of information that you think are important for us, well, the general public, to be aware of before we start these more complex conversations about what to do with it?
Yeah. So yeah, so this is a conversation I have all the time. I work with agronomists and soil scientists as well as the farmers, distributors, people who are trying to sell products, people who are trying to promote ideas, and it is very complex. I mean, soil, when you start digging into it, It is incredibly complex. And then you start putting in plant soil interactions, all the microbes, ecosystem function, all these things. So for me, there's layers, right? There's, you know, at the core fundamental layer is the farmer interacting with his land. And it's all about very practical, very intuitive knowledge, and we've lost that. The farmers have lost a lot of that intuitive knowledge that they had. They managed, we've been doing agriculture for a very long time. And when I look at, the reality of the history of agriculture, more often than not, it's a natural disaster or some shift that caused the system to fail. Right? There's a really great book. It's really fascinating. It's a very interesting perspective. It's Dr. David Montgomery wrote a book called Dirt, The Erosion of Civilizations. A very interesting perspective. And I'm sure that there's a lot of that is true in that, farming practices were working and then they didn't work. And then the civilization collapsed. Right. There's a lot of that.
They're unable to adapt fast enough to the change.
It's because something changed in the natural world, and they weren't in their intuitive knowledge didn't allow them to. They didn't have resilience or adaptability built into it. They just did what they did, and when it changed, they were unable to keep up. But that intuitive knowledge is there, and people know how. If they learn how to be adaptable, they can manage it. But, it just gets so complex. So the real answer to the question from my perspective is I want to know when I'm working with a farmer, what I want to know as at the very, very basic level, do you have biology? And the answer is yes, always. If it's a farm and plants were growing in it or are growing in it, you have biology. Okay. There are a few places in the world where that's not the case. Very few.
Yeah.
So yes, you have biology. And then we start looking at how is it in balance? Do you have enough fungi and bacteria? Is it in good balance for your plants? And the balance is based off of ecological succession principles. There's people are starting to question that now, as the academics start to dig, to start researching more and more of these ecological systems and niches. The question of soil microbiology balance starts coming in. People are calling it out, and saying maybe that's not as accurate as we thought. But I tell people it was never accurate to begin with. It's a general conception. The higher carbon in the plant, the more fungi it needs. That's the concept right there. That's all we're looking at. The tree needs more fungi because it needs more carbon and it needs slightly different nutrient availability than a broccoli, which has very low carbon content but high nitrogen content. So it needs more bacterial. It's a very simple approach because it's, again, it gets complex. The more I talk about it, it's going to get more and more complex. But the basic core is, do you have biology? Is it in the right balance? And what is limiting your function, your soil function? So I like to look at pH, electrical conductivity, bacteria and fungal populations is really the core of it. If those things are not broken, so to speak, then you're pointed in the right direction, and then there may be contamination, right? If you've over fertilized for years or over tilled the soil, you may have compaction issues, you may have salt buildup, chemical buildup. Then you just have to start asking questions. How do I remediate that? How do I get that functioning again? And those tools are simple. Those things are simple. Academics love to make it really much more complicated because they're actually asking a different question than what a farmer needs to ask, and So that's when you move into that new realm, looking at the microbiome. We're doing a lot of that work now. People are, um, doing genetic sequencing, looking at bacteria and fungal population of the whole microbiome. Problem with that is, A, it's very fascinating, and B, it's very inaccessible. It's good for the academics, and it needs to be done. I really believe it needs to be done. We need to be looking at those things. But right now, it's kind of in its infancy, and it's not so practical for most farmers, and it's expensive.
Yeah.
The work, it's one thing to do the work on a vineyard where, you've got an acre could be worth tens of thousands of dollars, but when you're working on an acre in Africa that's worth, a few $100s if you're on a good day, they're not going to be that interested in doing genomics.
Yeah.
But and even chemistry testing, it's like, unless there's something really, really, really wild and wacky about your soil, you probably got plenty of nutrients. You're just not available, right? So it's, that's something that I think a lot of people miss, is when they do CEC testing or some other type of chemistry testing, they're not looking at what's actually there. More often than not, they remove the organic matter before they do the chemistry test. Well, that's where a lot of your nutrients are, is in the organic matter and in the biology that lives there. So, chemistry testing is very limiting, I think. And it's just, so looking at it from the perspective of, look, you got all the science, people are studying things, now they're finally starting to look at interactions, this bacteria and this bacteria working together, or looking at, how does a fungal network impact the bacterial network or the protozoa network, and how do nematode populations. So that's all fascinating and really wonderful science, but that's academic. At the end of the day, is it going to help a farmer produce better crop? Maybe someday that information will be helpful, and for some people it may be helpful today. But the reality is like, look, you can do some really simple testing at home that tells you enough to help make sure that you're on the right path. We're not trying. That's one thing I've really learned, because I still run the lab here and have been running it basically for 20 years, is that testing is only as good as what you're willing to do with it. And a lot of the testing that we've done here is actually academic level research. It's research level testing. And so finding more practical ways to make testing accessible to the farmer has been a real something that I've been really working on the last few years, is to find a way. How do I get, because even just sending a sample to us from Kenya, for example, it can take a month, and it's a ton of paperwork, and it's not easy.
Because a lot of this is academic information, and while it might be useful to you, doesn't necessarily justify the cost, the complexity, or the time put in for a farmer, especially based on how much let's say economic yield they could get in return for this information. What are the bare minimum tests, investigations, observations that you help someone else with, just to get the necessary information that they can use in a practical way to make decisions and adjust management on their farm?
Yeah. So we've actually developed a field lab that answers those questions specifically. So the first thing is to walk across the field and look at it. I can't tell you how many farmers say, okay, look at your field. What do you see? Just look. It tells you so much. Oh, I've got all these different types of weeds. Okay, well, maybe you should research what those weeds mean. Rather than trying to figure out which herbicide to use, to actually ask the question, what is this weed telling me? What is dandelion telling me? What is thistle? What are nettles? What are, these different types of plants that we don't want? What are they actually telling us? So, in the soil, just look at the soil. You can tell a lot from just the texture and the feel of it, right? So
Well, here, look, before we
that's the
move on from the weeds thing, because this is really important and I completely agree with you, there is a
yeah.
lot of debate as to where to find good information on how to read your weeds. There have been books written, there are some resources in different languages. Where do you go to investigate weeds?
I just go on the internet and look up the weed, and then start sifting. One of the biggest challenges right now in the information age is finding good information, like you
Indeed.
say. So that's a whole nother skill set.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me how many people can't find an answer on the internet because they don't know how to search and they don't know what kind of questions to ask.
Or filter
So
through the loads
or
of
be able
nonsense
to,
that come up in a search.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and there's always, it's pretty easy once you start really thinking about it, and that's really thinking is probably the most important test.
Mm-hmm.
Use your brain, use your eyes, use your senses. I'm very much into, phenomenology. What are you actually experiencing and seeing?
Yeah, it turns out we have some very sensitive instruments and equipment attached to our bodies that many of us aren't trained to actually use.
Yeah, yeah, including our eyes and ears. And what are you actually seeing? So finding that information, all I do is, if I'm not familiar with it, I just look it up and try and get a sense of, is it an annual or perennial? Those really important to know the distinction there, because it changes how you approach it. Is it rhizobia? Is it a rhizome type of plant where it propagates through the roots? Those are
Rhizomus, yeah, yeah,
nasty.
yeah.
Yeah, rhizomas. Um, and then I try and figure out, well, what's the characteristic nutrient or characteristic habitat? Just trying to figure out, is it a weed that likes really rich soil, or is it a weed that likes really depleted soil? Because it turns out weeds grow everywhere all the time in every condition. There's no such thing as you know, but there are concepts within the successional idea of pioneer species versus, is it border species that lives on the edge? Is it common with grasses or is it more common with shrubs? Is it a desert plant? Does it need a lot of water or does it need less water? Those kind of things. If you look enough, just enough, and it doesn't take long to just kind of vet it out a little bit and see, and I get opinions. I look at academic publications if there's anything about that weed. And I also look up like the, home gardener, you know, the farmer's almanac kind of stuff,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
where it's like, okay, what's the traditional wisdom? The other thing that's really interesting is to look up what's the medicinal value of that plant, because that tells you a lot too about the kind of nutrients that it likes and things like that. So the herbology, ancient, older types of traditions, and it doesn't take long. I think a lot of people think it takes a lot of time to do research, but the internet makes it so easy to just pop in the name, and then if you have a common name, look up the common name and then search the scientific name.
Yeah.
That's the other thing too, because there's a lot of things that are commonly named the same and they represent 5 or 6 different plants.
Sure.
Just depends on where you are regionally, so you got to be careful with common names, figure out what you're actually working with. So, in my opinion with weeds is that, unless they're actually interfering with your crop, they're probably not a problem. Weed pressure comes from over fertilization of bad soil.
Mm.
And there's nutrient cycling aspects, the chemistry, the pH of the soil has a big impact on whether or not your corn is going to be successful, or your broadleaf, weed, So it's very important to pay attention, research a little bit, and see, is this actually, because there's a lot of myths out there about weeds and stuff, and I don't want to get into that too much, because that's a politically charged area, but essentially, you know the way we farm these days is really conducive to weed production. When we disturb the soil and we spray these, we over apply inorganic fertilizers, that actually is really, the weeds love that. That's why then we need herbicides to control them long enough for our main crop to get established. And we do all these funny things to try and manage it, when really the solution is probably much more simple. But I'll just say it doesn't make money. And at least not for the people selling all the tools that are doing that kind of work. Not to say that you never need them. Those tools can be really helpful saving a crop, but,
it shouldn't be plan A.
Yeah, it shouldn't be plan A. So, when you're looking at beyond that, when you're looking at a soil, obviously just looking at it, observing what's growing, doing a little research to kind of give you a sense of what might be happening. Then, there's a little EC and pH meter you can get. Prep your soil, and you can measure your electrical conductivity, which is really just telling you your salt content. Do I have too much or too little, available salt? And it's like ions. It's like, the electrolytes of the soil is what it's measuring. So you can tell pretty quickly if you've got excess. It goes really high. And if it's low, it just means that there's not a lot of movement, it's not available. pH obviously has some big impacts on how the nutrient cycle works. But really, I'm only looking at it not from a chemistry perspective, but from the biological perspective. If it's too high or too low a pH, it inhibits microbial activity. And if the EC is too high or too low, then the food is either limiting, it's too much salt is limiting microbial activity, and too little, they don't have food to work with. So those are, really simple, easy things to measure, and just keep those in mind when you're working on your solutions, right? And then the bacteria and fungi. So, here's a promotional plug for Microbiometer.
Yeah, I've tested out that one pretty extensively.
Yeah. So it's a company based in New York that developed, basically what they've developed is they're using spectrophytometry to analyze the density of the microbes in a sample. And this is pretty old. It's been around for a while, this kind of technology of measuring biological content through density. And what they've been able to do is develop a system that uses the cell phone to measure it instead of a big fancy spectrophytometer. Now, I'll be honest, I was not a big fan at first, until I figured out some things and actually talked to them about what they're doing and how they're doing it, and realizing that they made some assumptions early on with the way their algorithms for converting the numbers was a little off, and so we actually started collaborating with them using direct microscopy comparisons, as well as they compared it to other methods. And they're in the process of completely revamping their whole algorithms and adjusting for newer phones. There's some issues with the newer phone cameras that they had to adjust for. But we figured out, it's been working great we've been using it exclusively for 2 years now to test total bacteria and total fungi populations. But we had to make some tweaks to it. Mm-hmm. So those tweaks there's a new version of the app, which is much better than it was. they're refactoring a lot of their assumptions based on our collaboration. So I'm really excited about that. And they have, they're just doing a lot of work to make it even better. And the simple thing is that it was working really well for composts. Worked great. It was so close. It was hardly worth even mentioning, right? And again, I'm not a really detailed science guy. I don't do this from that it has to be within plus or minus 0.1% or something like that. It's within 5 to 10% of what we were getting in the lab. And I was like, you know what, based on cost, time, and all that, that's in the information that it provides the farmer doesn't change with that small of a difference. What we found was with the soils, they were using the same algorithm as they were using for compost on a soil, which was basically they were assuming too much moisture content in the soil. So composts can be 40 to 50% moisture. Soils on an average, and I've done 30,000 soil tests over the years. Most soils are, a lot of them are more like 10% moisture content. Some of them are 30, maybe 40, depending on, but the average across all of them is about 20%. So when we changed the assumption on the moisture content, all of a sudden the soils started working. So we were getting the right kinds of numbers and stuff. And it's like, okay, that's good. And then there was a couple other little things that they're tweaking with the algorithms. So, but that is a tool that if you have your cell phone and the microbiometer stuff, you can do the test in practically real time in the field and give the farmer the answer right then. When I was in Kenya, one of the biggest complaints was that, they want to be able to test their soils, but they were talking about chemistry, so that we can put the right fertilizer down. I said, well, what if you didn't have to test for chemistry and could put the right tools down that supported your soil instead of, and then let the soil support your plant? So then we started testing, and the cost is so expensive to get chemistry testing done in Kenya, and you have to ship it off even within the country, and it could take 4 to 6 weeks to get results back from a lab.
At that point, that snapshot is almost useless.
Yeah, by then they've already moved on. They have to they don't have that much lead time in their growing seasons. So when we show up with the field kit, pull the soil sample, prep it, do the measurement, and say, this is where you're at, and this is the kind of things that you should be thinking about to help support this. And it's just great. They absolutely love it. And so that's one of the models that we're building is in Kenya, we have this idea of training youth to do the soil testing and to give them the toolbox of what are the tools that the farmer might need based on the testing. And then they can go out. And so our pilot project is a young man on a motorcycle with an agronomy degree, trained up in the biological approach, goes on his motorcycle, drives to the farm, does the soil test right there, gives them the results, and then he also has product with him that might or might not be something the farmer needs.
Yeah.
And because one of the products that I developed is instead of hundreds of kilos per acre, it's half a kilo per acre. And we put that in place, and it replaces all of their inorganic fertilizer.
That's radical. Okay, before we get into the products themselves.
Yeah.
So we just kind of covered the basics of the essential tests, the indicators that you're looking for so that you can start to make management decisions. How are you deciphering these different results and extrapolating information or actions from them?
Well, it's pretty simple. If the pH is too high or too low, if the EC is too high or too low, and you need to do something to adjust the salt content, and I can talk about that more with the product that I developed to help address these. But in a lot of cases, look at the water, look at your water source. If you're irrigating, that could be a cause of a lot of problems. Is the water any good? Add organic matter to the soil, start doing compost. Look at how, there's lots of little practices, all the little practices. So we talk about, can you make your own compost in a reasonable amount of time to introduce organic matter to the system to help start buffering those things and give the habitat, right? Then with bacteria and fungi, it's kind of the same thing, but it's like, well, if you're low in fungi, which is more often the case than not, you need to add some carbon into the soil somehow. Give it some, again, compost with some woody content, even wood chips, chopped up, dried plant material worked into the soil. Stop tilling it. That's a big one. We're really promoting no slash and burn, right? That's a big one, especially in the tropic South, South America, Central America, not so much in Africa, but at least where we've been working. No slash and burn, and don't overwork the land. Don't break it up so much, and they never till at the right time because there's one tractor to serve 100 farmers.
Oh, sure.
And so that tractor just, is contracted by the farmers, and he just drives around and tills the fields. And he gets to it when he gets to it. Just hope that he doesn't come after they've planted for some reason. I don't know. Communication is really important. So just simple practices, reduce inputs, and often, they'll the inorganic fertilizers, even if they can get them, they're causing more problems than they're helping usually. They just don't know it because they get a plant response, but then it's less and less every year. So that's where a lot of them are at, especially with the change in the weather patterns there in that region. And everywhere, actually, things are changing everywhere. Call it global warming is not the right terminology, but certainly climate change. Things are changing. Yeah. So got to be paying attention to not the political side of it, but the practical side of it. What am I going to do in the face of changing weather patterns? Indeed. That's what's important. So,
and building resilience for those inevitabilities within the soil that you're working with.
Yeah, and if you're monitoring your soil like this, where you can at least once a year say, is my bacteria and fungi working? Is the EC and pH doing well? Is the weed pressure less? Is it changed? Do I have different weeds now? That happens a lot. Where, we start doing this stuff, the weeds change.
Sure. You're moving through a different ecological succession.
Yeah.
You need to just see the signals that tell you where you're at.
Yep. And when the weeds are exactly the same conditions as your crop, then you need to figure out how to make money from your weeds.
And so what does the research and development process look like when you started to gather, 30,000 soil tests and been to so many different parts of the world and probably start to see some patterns of what people are dealing with? What are the common things? I assume that's what you're trying to solve for when you're developing products. What does that process look like? What are you solving for, and how long does it take?
For me, I've been, developing my own products now for about 12 years, I think, 10 to 12, 13 years. The first thing was scalability. How do we, getting people a biological inoculant is one of the biggest, earliest things that I did. We did tea, compost extract, composting. There's a lot of products out there you can buy, individual bacteria, you can buy fungi, you can do ferments, very limited set of species, bokashi, EM, effective microorganisms, all of these great tools. great tools, but the diversity isn't there. And not everybody is capable or in a position to be able to do any or all of those things. I worked with farmers, even with only 1,000 acres, if you're doing compost tea, you need, the recommended application rate is 10 to 20 gallons per acre. So now you got to produce 10 to 20,000 gallons of a product, right? And, even with 1,000-gallon brewer, you're looking at 10 batches, 20 batches of material that you need to produce. It takes time. It can take up to 3 days to produce a batch. And then you've got a very narrow window for application. And if something goes wrong, which is very easy, then you have to scrap it and start over. So that was one of the first challenges. And so I started looking at the biology that's in a tea, what makes it good, what makes it bad, what makes it effective, and started experimenting. It took me a long time because it was not a full-time R&D process. It was just me tinkering with stuff, looking at things. So I needed to address a couple of questions. One was concentration. Can I get it more concentrated? Can I get it stable enough to be able to make it and ship it? Can I bottle it? Can I stick a label on it and get it registered with the states as a product? Because we're running into a lot of situations like in California where they would love to be able to do a biological approach, but they need an MSDS sheet. They need the material safety data sheet. They need a label. They need to know what's in it. They need it to be registered in order to, for the government to sign off on it or these different things. So really that was the first challenge. And so I created a product called Soil Provide. Shelf stable for years. I've got a bottle that I made in 2011 that's still good. It's sitting in my office here. It's just, I test it every couple of years now, say, okay, what's going on in there now? I found a way to stabilize it without killing everything, having good diversity. So it's not fermented, it's not cultured. It's a naturally derived set of organisms and bacteria and fungi, and just focused on how concentrated can I make it. So right now it's a gallon per acre application rate, but I've got some new equipment, processing equipment on its way. And I think I could get it down to a pint an acre of a biological inoculant, and so it's the density of the microbes and the ability to keep it stable and get it registered. So that was a big challenge. It took time. And as soon as that product came out, what I ended up doing was helping a lot of my clients of the past sell off their equipment for tea brewing. So I had one guy, he had 300-gallon tea brewer, and he had 2,000 acres of farmland. So he's like, okay, I can buy 8 totes, 8,000 gallons of your product, and it's ready to go when I am. And that was a big consideration, the logistics of it, getting it to them, and then it sits. If you have a rain event, you can't drive on the field, or something happens and you have to wait a week or two before you can go out and apply, or, equipment breaks down, things happen, right? So with tea and other things like that, where there's no shelf life, it's very challenging. So this changed the game for a lot of producers, and now we're selling. I haven't even looked at how much we've sold this year, of that product to these larger American farms. Now that doesn't help the farmer in Kenya, but it's a U.S. product. It doesn't. I can't ship it outside of the U.S. This is the biology. But I am working with groups in Africa as well as in Europe to maybe develop production in those regions so that they can make their own version of it, possibly. But then there's another tool that I created that's the food resource. So when you look at the history of soil microbiology, Dr. Ingham's work, the whole compost tea, evolution. There's just kind of the short list of things that everybody says you need, right? You need fish hydrolysate, you need kelp, you need humic acid, you need, that's pretty much it. Those are the three big ones, right? That everybody kind of utilizes. Everybody has all their little tips and tricks. Some people really like silica and other things, it just depends. Often it depends on the crop too. But, I started vetting out all of those ingredients and testing them. So I tested, I don't know, 40 or 50 different humic acid products. I tested so many fish products, and shipped to me from all over the world, right? And just, okay, who's making the best fish, and who's making the best. We even tested out molasses. That's another one that a lot of people utilize. And, I learned a lot in the process doing that. And the biggest learning was that none of these products are the same ever. They have the same name, but they're not the same. They're all radically different. It depends on how they're produced, who's producing them, what's the source material, what other things do they do to it. None of them are the same. And not all of them work.
Sure.
So I vetted it out. And so what I did was I went around and I had to answer questions that, I needed all powder-based products. I couldn't use liquid-based products because of transportation costs.
Yeah, shipping around liquids,
and and also handling, and it's just not very concentrated, a lot of these things. So I started researching soluble powders so that I could package it up into as concentrated a thing as I could. And then I created a blend of those things that I found that was the right blend. And so there's two products that I have now. It's called Soil Revive. That is the humic acid, kelp, and amino acid profile, and complex carbohydrates. And the thing is that what we're looking at is micronutrients for the biology. That's part of it, to feed the biology. But the other part of it is I need a humic acid that actually can neutralize salt and chelate nutrients. And that was the hard part, is finding one that actually did that the way it's supposed to in a very concentrated form. So going in and addressing the salt and pH issues with a good humic acid, complex carbohydrates, amino acid profile to help feed and stimulate fungi, and then kelp is micronutrients, and food, and it's really synergistic with those things. And then the newest product that I created, this is what I'm taking to Africa. Also, I include a small amount of sea minerals. So dried sea salt, basically it's sea salt, really low concentration, because it has all of the micronutrients, like 90 some odd nutrient
in just content. Trace element quantities.
Yeah, in the trace element, just tiny amounts. So it's more, I don't want to say it this way, but it's more like a homeopathy type of approach.
I gotcha.
But then I also found a powdered fish that works. It smells awful, but it works really well, and it's highly concentrated, so I can add the fish in along with the other ingredients to create, basically, we're selling it as a soil fertilizer instead of a plant fertilizer. And so we're going in and feeding the biology, feeding the soil, and starting to repair some of those major things. And that one took a while because the fish component I couldn't find a fish that worked, in a dry soluble form. So
it sounds like you have done very extensive research, not only on the other products that are out there, but you breezed over things like, I don't know if it was bokashi and different compost making. I don't know if you've gone into things like biochar and these other that have become different types of fads and promises. What has been your overall impression of those? You hinted that they work in their own ways but are insufficient. Are there any that are really up to snuff, or do they need to be combined?
I think they're all tools. Even my own products are only a tool in a system, in a whole holistic system. In some cases, something like Bukashi may be really appropriate, or EM. Uh, biochar, biochar is like compost. It's so variable. You can make, compost is almost impossible to ever duplicate. You never make the same compost twice, and it's
Sure,
easy
sure.
to screw it up.
Yeah.
Biochar works great in some cases and not so great in other cases. And it's like,
What are the cases that you've seen that effectively change things?
when they are incredible, like sandy soil that's incredibly low in organic material, a small amount of biochar. Also, I've seen it in potting mixes where it's like 5 to 10% of the blend in a potting soil for container growers. I think it's a really effective component, but it depends. pH, the source materials, how is it pyrolyzed? All of those factors go into, so what I tell people when they're looking at it is I say, well, you got to try out a few different brands
Mm.
and see which one works for you. And I tell people the same thing, even with our own products. I'm like, look, I don't say that my product is the solution to all of your problems. It's a tool to help you with some of your problems. In some clients we have, it's like, you don't even need my product. You don't need it. Don't use it. You need to do other things. Sometimes it doesn't work. Just depends. There's very rare. Actually, I had seen it not work. So, but I don't assume that it's a perfect solution. So all of those things, they're all tools. They're all different ways of approaching biology. And the thing that is important, I think, is looking at them and saying, okay, if it is bringing a broad spectrum of diversity, or it's specifically addressing population that I might need, then great. Those are two tools. You can buy trichoderma, for example, one type of fungi, and in large quantities, it can help with fungal diseases. In small amounts, it's naturally occurring. It's probably already there. It just isn't doing its job, for whatever reason. Start thinking about that. Why is the disease prevalent and working and my other biology is not? It's probably diversity issue, more than anything else. So, think of diversity, think of what's the function of it. There's a lot of, there's a lot of crazy home remedies out there, people doing all kinds of stuff. And it's like, look, those are probably fine, but are they commercially scalable? Are they practical for farmers to actually implement?
Yeah.
Not to call anybody out by name, but there's people promoting adding milk. I saw a commercial. There's a plant app that helps you grow, and one of the things that they say just in the ad is to put milk into your soil
Raw
for
milk.
your plant. Just milk,
Okay. Yeah.
and it doesn't say what kind of milk. It just says to add milk, and it's lactobacillus. So there's certain things that may be helpful. There's calcium and some calcium and stuff in milk, but is that practical for a farmer to be applying milk to their field?
Yeah.
And do they know why? That's the other thing. So yeah, all those other things, they're just tools. I look at everything as a tool, and every client I work with, they're like, I work with a lot of biodynamic farmers. I don't tell them that what they're doing is right or wrong. I just help them understand, what's going on. And if they can start asking the question, is this thing that I'm doing actually making a difference?
Yeah.
Can you answer that question? If you can't answer that question and you're just doing it as a cultural practice, the next question is it doing any harm?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And if it's not hurting anything and you like doing it and it makes you happy, then keep doing it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
there's no
But if
reason
you're
to.
looking for a particular outcome, make sure that you're measuring the progress towards that
Yeah, measure
in
the
a way that,
progress, yeah, and start asking questions, is yeah, it's always about asking questions. And then there's always the opportunity to go deeper and broader with testing. A lot of the clients I work with, they're applying products and then they're testing the actual plant nutrient value, right? And that's when you start getting into another level of the farming, is saying, is the nutrient density, am I getting the nutrients that I want? It is like, if I'm doing forage for cattle, am I getting the right kind of nitrogen? And is there all the other elements there that I need or want, for my feed?
yeah.
And so if you're measuring that, then you start asking questions. Well, what can I add to my system that doesn't hurt the biology, that could improve my nutrient uptake? And that's the other thing that humic acid helps with, is it helps with nutrient uptake in the plants, chelates the salts, nutrient uptake, and then we stimulate the biology to do its job, right? So, and in the US, we need biology because of the way they farm.
Yeah.
The biology is really low. In Africa, they don't need the biology so much because they haven't done the damage. It's not as
More through,
yeah,
through chemicals and heavy tillage you're talking about.
yeah, chemicals. Mostly the chemicals. Most of them can't afford it, so we don't have to worry about that too much.
So we just talked about all of the different products and things that you can make, some of the elements that can move things forward in a positive way as far as soil function. What about practices? What about ways of managing your ecology that
Yeah,
is the other side of the coin towards getting things
absolutely.
to work?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, adopting conservation tilling is really probably the core foundation for most farmers, is to look at the way they're managing the physical structure of the soil and that habitat for the microbes. I'm not necessarily specifically a no-till guy, when it comes to that, because I think in some cases, a little, and there's also, yeah, a little
Tillage is not just
tilling.
one thing, right? We can talk
Yeah,
about different
it's
types of moving
yeah,
earth.
there's cultivation, there's harrowing, there's tilling, there's deep ripping, there's all these things.
Yeah.
The no-till movement is for American farmers who are going in and destroying their soil several times a year, right? It's just pulverizing it,
Yeah.
turning it into dust. Conservation tilling is doing the right amount at the right time for the right reason, right? And so you got to think. That's the thinking. That's the most important practice, is thinking about what you're doing and how it might be impacting what's going on.
Working to understand all of the implications of what an action or a product
Implications.
might actually be
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah. So in one of the groups that I work with, is Partners in Progress. They're based out of Pittsburgh, US, but they do work in Haiti and Uganda and other parts, and they do agroecology training with the farmers. And some of the practices they use, of course, composting is a really good practice. Reduce tilling, so a lot of it's eliminating practices. The most important practice is the one you don't do. No slash and burn, but then they're teaching them how to, like, contour swaling. They call it keyline plowing in other parts of the world, where you are using the land to the way you do your planting, following the contours of the land so that you're managing water better. If you're doing everything in a straight line based on the compass, then when the water moves through that system, what happens? You lose your crops, you get washed away,
You're designing for erosion.
Yeah, you're designing for erosion. So this is designing for not erosion. And and it's really simple too. They've got this really great A-frame system for doing contour swaling.
Got the classic
it's so great, and it's easy. It's low tech.
I've made so many of those. They're great.
Yeah. And just work in the land. And then also they do these swales So they move all the dirt, compost, and organic material into these berms
Yep.
that follow the contours. So they have a path to walk through. They have a nice berm to plant into, and also it holds the water as it moves through. Those, and it's really great practices. The other big thing is trees, planting trees around the farm, especially in a tropical system. You can plant leguminous trees, and they grow really fast. They provide shade, and also you can harvest leaves for your compost. So you can, after the growing season, you harvest a bunch of leaves. You got your nitrogen source for your compost operation, and those leaves grow back really fast. So it also creates habitat for birds and other wildlife, which is really important. Companion planting, work integrating animals into the system, all kinds of different things that you can do. But the biggest one is just taking care of the soil in a way that allows it to grow and function. That's probably, and I've seen, I was just talking to somebody yesterday. They do the lasagna method of soil, bed preparation, where they just layer compost and straw and different things, and
Yep.
cardboard or whatever.
Yep.
Create layers, and then let it decay. It's basically it's composting in place.
Yes.
And big fan of that. That's great. I've seen some of the Korean natural farming practices, with the hugel composting and things like that.
Brewing of indigenous microorganisms, the IMOs.
You can do that. IMO, actually, I didn't bring that up because it's similar to bokashi, but doing that can be really great. I learned about that in Hawaii. I was watching them do it, and I was like, wow, this is really great. Very simple method. My favorite type of compost is static compost, just a bunch of wood chips, simple ingredients, and then let it sit for a year in a good spot, and just, it's great. It's easy. You don't have to monitor temperatures and turn it and do all this other and water it and all these things. It's like, just
too many points of failure.
Oh, there's so many points of failure, and that's the other thing too, is to realize that the more, you want to have some diversity of practices and tools available to you, but don't overthink it. Think about it, but don't overthink it. I was working with a tomato producer in Mexico who learned about composting, and they went out and bought, I think they had 30 different ingredients that were going into their compost. Wow. They had like 2 different types of bat guano, seabird guano. They had cow manure, they had chicken manure, they had like 5 or 6 different types of wood chips. They were using all this stuff. It's like, how much did that cost you to get all these materials? Now, and in the back, they had all of the tomato plants that were waste product.
Oh, yeah.
And they're piling them up in the back in a big heap. And I'm like, what are you doing with those? Oh, no, we don't use those. I'm like, okay, you need to stop right now. Find some really good wood chips and mix it with your tomato waste, and then add nitrogen if you need it to get it hot, and see what happens. They started doing that, and it's like all of a sudden now their waste stream is gone. They don't have all that waste. The disease was killed. That's why they weren't using it, because they didn't want the disease from the tomato, the dead tomato plants, to get back into the greenhouse. This is greenhouse production. But if they compost it properly, they don't have the disease, and it became easier and simpler for them to do it, and better results. So sometimes simple is easy, the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes is, an imperfect system or method is better than a perfect one that you abandon.
Yeah, that's right.
It's part of the reason for keeping it simple. And you can always build on from there. You can fine tune, you can add steps, but get the basics down for sure.
Yeah. And that's what we're doing in Kenya. We're introducing this product to the farmers, and they're using it and then they see the results, and then they're asking questions.
Yeah.
Then we can take them through an education process. Then we can take them
You
through.
sparked the interest there first. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the biggest areas of, work with one of my distributors works with the regenerative groups. And one of the biggest challenges is getting people to adopt these practices and stick to it.
Yeah.
Because often, if all you do is practices, it could take 2-3 years. Some of the really big examples, it took them 20 years to get the farm where they wanted it, because, they did it slow, methodically, and they had the patience or whatever, or the insanity to stick with it. But most farmers can't afford that, right? They can't afford that level of risk. So that's where I think that where we can make a real difference for people who are wanting to transition. We've got some tools to help you fix some of those problems. Testing, look at what's going on. Here's some products that might help accelerate the process and get you where you need to be, transition away from the harmful stuff faster, right? Get into, and the other thing too is, like with my products, I call them diminishing input material. They are designed to, in certain circumstances, not always appropriate, but, regenerative farming is the idea that your soil should be functional on its own, right?
Yeah.
That's the ultimate goal. Now, human beings are involved in that process. You're never going to get there. Okay. Human beings, I don't care how meticulous you are in your practice. If you're planting a crop and harvesting it, you will never attain 100% regenerative, sustainable system.
Because you're always removing something essential from
you're taking and removing, you're moving through it. And it's not, if you're restoring a natural system to whatever, then fine. Yeah, of course you can. That's totally doable. But with farming, but my tools, a lot of the tools out there, especially the inorganic and even organic fertilizers, you need more and more to get less and less every year, because they're destroying the soil. With our products, we're trying to use less and less, and you get more and more out of it, because the soil becomes more and more functional. Do you ever stop using these things? Probably not, but you could use less every year, and we start pretty low to begin with. So it's not like, it's a big change,
It's an important difference. Yeah.
Yeah. So we are trying to create a product that, I don't expect to work with the client for more than 2 or 3 years, get them where they want to be. The testing, they understand what's going on. If they buy the testing for themselves, then I don't even need to provide that service. And then the products could potentially just be a stopgap while they're learning how to make their own compost or something like that, or adopt their own localized resources to continue sustaining the farm. So, I don't look at it as, I'm not trying to replace the fertilizer business. I'm trying to usurp it.
Gotcha. Well, and so you also put a lot of effort into educational resources. Can you tell me about what you've developed so far?
So we do, all through the years, we've always done workshops, anywhere from 2 days to a week. Dr. Ingham does workshops and online training, which is a whole separate thing. We did a series of webinars during the pandemic. So in 2020, we did a series of 26 webinars, one every week for half a year. It was crazy, the amount of work that we put into that. And we recorded everything. And so that's available on our website. You can purchase modules, or you can do the whole thing. And once you get it, you have access to it. And it covers almost all of these topics that we discussed, looking at the testing, different types of testing, looking at practices as well as the tools, and also understanding ecological succession a little deeper, understanding the role and function of the biology, why they're important. We didn't even get into that today, really digging, really looking at, why is fungi important and why is it so easily disrupted? Those are topics that we cover. I even, do a lot. So 26 episodes, of live recordings. Just me talking with it's probably 20 people, I think, went through that course with us. So now we're working on a book right now, a Living Soils Handbook that we're hoping will be available maybe early next year. I've been working on a book for a decade, so it's, don't hold me to any of this. But just something simple and accessible that kind of goes through everything and it's written down and, vetted out, and trying to get resources and references. So we also do, we have a whole bunch of resources on our website, like different types of labs, different testing methodologies. So there's links and there's a resource, if you need, heavy metals testing, or if you need, if you do want to do some genomic testing or, different types of testing, there's a lot of resources on links to labs that we've worked with or that we appreciate the work that they do.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's quite a body of work you put together there, and I'll make sure to link to those on the show notes for this episode. Can you tell our listeners how they can get in touch and, well, aside from finding the resources you just mentioned, kind of start to take some of the steps and move forward with, solving problems on their farms with you guys?
I mean, it's visiting the website has all of our contact information. It has, the products are on there with prices. Everything's priced. That's one thing that really drives me crazy is companies will have a product and they don't tell you how much it costs. So the testing services, the education, and the products are all on the website with prices. Just keep in mind as a farmer, those are all retail prices. So the next step would be to reach out to us and start talking to us. We're very accessible. You can email info@earthfort.com. You can email me directly, Matt, M-A-T-T, @earthfort.com. You can call the office. We're here during the week. And sometimes, well, I'm always working. So it's, sometimes I won't answer the phone in the middle of the night.
Oh, man.
I know some boundaries, but I'll get back to you as soon as I can.
Brilliant. Well, look, man, that's a lot to get us going for. I can tell that we could do multiple full episodes on other parts that we just glossed over today. Maybe we can do a follow-up about the function of biology, bacteria, and fungi in the soil. This was really fun. It's quite a breadth of knowledge that you've gotten over the years in such different contexts and circumstances that makes it really useful to go over the patterns and the learnings from all of that is really insightful. Thank you for that.
Yeah, well, you're most welcome. And thank you for having me. And I hope this is useful to your listeners.
Thanks again to Matt. I'll link to all of the resources that he mentioned at the end there in the show notes for this episode on the website at regenerativeskills.com. Now, before we wrap this up, just remember that these episodes are only the beginning of the learning resources, design and coaching services, in-person courses, and interactive community that are available through Regenerative Skills. The Discord server is our free community where you can connect with other like-minded listeners, exchange ideas, stories, tips, and resources, as well as interact with me directly and quite a few former guests from this show. Our Instagram account @regen_skills is the best place to see the projects that me and the team are working on, both for clients and collaborators, as well as on our own properties. I'll also be announcing the certification courses, workshops, and gatherings that we've got coming up later this year. If you're interested in getting dedicated support for your own project, you can now schedule a free planning session with one of our team members through the request form on our website. You can also find all the links, show notes, and past resources there at regenerativeskills.com. We truly believe that no matter your experience, your knowledge, abilities, resources, or background, you can be a powerful force for regeneration on this planet, and we're here to help you find your path. So as always, remember to keep taking those little steps every day towards a regenerative future, and I'll be right by your side along the way.